None of the banks will be able to sustain withdrawals of this magnitude for more than about 48 hours, perhaps less. The money is not in their vaults. It has been put into interest-bearing loans. Even if the loans were performing, they would not have the money. Now that some of the larger loans are in default, the problem is even worse. If the Fed doesn't provide the money, the banks will have no choice but to close their doors and go out of business. That would cause a collapse of economy and untold suffering would follow. Americans would be thrown out of work, families would go hungry, national security would be weakened, and it would be undoubtedly spread to the entire world. Who knows what dire consequences would follow? Today's video request comes from Casey. Casey, thank you so much for being part of the Obasi posse. And she had requested to get in the subject about bank bail-ins, not bailouts. And this topic is quite large, so we're going to have to go through it in steps. I'm going to try to cover it the best that I can. Thank you so much for the video request. If any of you in the Obasi posse have any requests for videos or subjects to talk about on my channel, feel free to go in the description box below to find the link to my website and scroll down on the homepage, and you can request a topic by clicking Contact Now, and then you can submit your video request. First, let's start out with something simple, the difference between a bailout and a bail-in. A lot of people have heard what a bailout is because it differentiates from a bail-in. Now, a bailout is essentially where the government provides needed financial support to a failing or ailing financial institution in the form of money from the government treasury. A bail-in is where the ailing financial institution will be rescued using the depositor's money in the bank. That's right, that means that they would take your money from the bank. In order to understand how a bail-in and a bailout work, you need to understand the Federal Reserve as a whole. You need to understand the IMF, the World Bank, and how it functions in conjunction with the Federal Reserve System and the central banking system. And after this is understood, you need to understand what's happening currently in our economy today and where we're headed. Let's take a look at a couple graphs and the U.S. debt clock. The debt clock of the United States is ever increasing to astronomical and irreversible levels. Following the crash of 1929, the supply of paper money was limited because it was backed by silver, and the amount of silver itself was limited. But right now, in 2020, there is nothing to back the money supply except politics. I encourage all of you to take a look at the charts, stack them up, lay them on top of each other, look at the debt charts, look at how it's ever increasing, compare them to previous stock market crashes, the 1929 crash, the Great Depression, the dot-com crash, the 2008 housing market crash, how the debt is ever increasing, how the governments can't even, forge together $100 billion. They are so desperate for money. They're going to the central banks to get even more loans, more inflation, more debt. It's the perfect storm. Earlier this year, when we saw the stock market drop, everyone began to panic and felt uncomfortable and unsafe keeping their money in the bank accounts. This is essentially why. The banks can fail, there could be a bank run, there could be bail-ins. Bail-ins are what you need to worry about, and it's essentially because for the money that you deposit in the bank doesn't hold all that money. They only have a set limit of cash reserves. They don't have enough actual cash to supply everyone's deposit. And this is the part of the video where many of you will comment and explain that, Mary, there is the FDIC. I have insurance on my deposit, typically up to $250,000. Okay, do you really think that the government is going to care about you when they can't even get money to supply all the money they lost? You don't think they're shaking in their boots? You think they're going to care about someone like you? You think they're really going to ensure that? And if they do, when will you get that money? Will you get it tomorrow? It'll probably take years. And what if the fiat currency no longer exists? What if they're weaning off of it after this collapse? Then what? Then how do you get your money? The U.S. debt is exceeding $27 trillion and counting. which amounts to over $82,000 for every single person living in the United States. This went up from $69,000 just last year. Now, I want you guys to view the Federal Reserve as the cartel, essentially. Look at it like that. And I'm going to explain a hypothetical but probable situation on what is going to happen within the banks, because banks were never meant to fail. I just want to put that out there. So let's just pretend, right? The most important emergency reform was to bail out the banks with taxpayer dollars. Defaulted foreign loans would be taken over by the IMF or World Bank, and the failing corporate borrowers would be given government grants disguised as loans which everyone knew no one would pay back. And then the banks would be nationalized, at least in part. In return for the bailout money, they would give large blocks of the stock to the government, which now operates as an official business partner. This isn't really a drastic change. The banks were already heavily regulated by government, even to the point of determining their profits, dividends, and executive salaries. But that is the way that the cartel, the banks, want it. It was the means by which competition would be avoided and profits would be assured. Monetary scientists and political scientists have always worked as a hidden partnership. This merely made the relationship more visible. And like I said, technically no bank was allowed to fail. So the Fed is trying to keep its promise on that. We're kind of seeing a war with the currencies between digitalized currency and this one we have now. So when the troubled banks would be taken over, all the depositors with $100,000 or $250,000 thou were protected by the FDIC. That's what they would tell you. And if they wanted their money and the bank didn't have it, the Fed would just manufacture it. And no one would worry about the value of those dollars because they were happy to have them. But then time will pass. A lot of times, some months will pass. And those dollars are flooding throughout the system, and the money supply will increase by the amount of bailouts plus the amount of new spending for welfare, healthcare, interest on national debt, and foreign aid, all of which would be in vertical climb. And this is when inflation becomes institutionalized. The dollar will eventually be dethroned as the world's de facto currency. Foreign investors and central banks will no longer have any use for dollars, and they will send them back to the US where they came from. And then that's why we're seeing on the World Economic Forum this central digitalized currency. Now, I can't make this video too long, so of course we're going to have to break it down as we do in most videos. But I've talked about the World Economic Forum, the New World Order, the One World Currency, and all the 111, uniting things as one. And I've talked many times about getting into gold and silver. I've talked many times about the cryptocurrencies, and I do talk about stocks on my Patreon, as well as talking about how they're trying to get rid of cash as a whole. I've came out with vlogs and videos on this. We're seeing here the digital currency could build a more sustainable global economy. I've mentioned several times on my channel to pay attention to words like sustainable and read them synonymously with the word perpetuate, basically preserving government control. That's what sustainable means. So just fill that word in with that word. Now, the World Economic Forum has come out with articles explaining that we might be closer to a global currency than ever before, and they're trying to issue national digital currencies. I just want to keep in mind that Bitcoin isn't backed by anything either. Now, what a lot of people don't know, the Emergency Banking Regulation Number 1, originally issued in 1961, empowered the Secretary of the Treasury, without consent of Congress, to seize anyone's bank account, savings account, or safety deposit box. It also gave him the power to fix rents, prices, salaries, hourly wages, and to impose rationing. This was to be done in the event of an attack on the United States. That phrase now has been changed to read, in the event of a national emergency. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, has been expanded to administer the directives of the Treasury. FEMA also has the power to detain and forcibly relocate any citizen in the event of a national emergency. So, I want to go back to a graph I briefly showed you guys. In a video I posted about April of 2020, I was talking about how we are going to face a
Oops.
And since then, that video was taken down and I have been banned and not allowed back on Facebook. And if we just look at the graph here, every time there is a peak in the graph, there is also a
Oops.
and I just want to point that out. So what should you do right now to prepare for any given disaster? I have repeatedly said on my channel to invest in silver and gold, particularly physical assets, rather than allocating the money into a different bank or stock. You can do that also, but there's nothing better than physical assets. I also recommend 100% to get yourself out of debt somehow, some way. I recommend it highly. On my Patreon, I share some of the stocks that I'm in and things I'm doing like that. So if you want to kind of start learning or getting into it, feel free to join me on my Patreon for that as well. But I recommend for so many reasons, and we'll get into a whole video on debt and actually how debt correlates biblically as well. So number one, get out of debt. And number two, invest in physical assets, bullion, precious metals. For those of you who don't know too much about that, I have a video that is still up on my channel, and I do a lot of money talk videos on my Patreon. So with that being said, we need to conclude this video to keep it somewhat short and a decent length. I have a lot more to say about a lot more to this topic, including the digital currencies. I have a whole video prepared, probably just for my Patreon, on the quantum financial system, QFS, and the distributed ledger technology, blockchain technology, and things along that nature. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Thank you for the video request. Make sure to like and consider supporting me on Patreon due to my censorship, and I will see you guys in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching.